Hey, this is Paul Banis with GreatDad.com, the website for fathers, because dads don't always think like moms. And if you're just tuning in, we do these talks to enjoy some conversations with expert fathers from all different, with all kinds of different points of view. But I'm just always fascinated by how fatherhood has evolved since my kids were little, and I love these conversations. And I'm so excited today to talk to somebody I've seen on countless videos in my training in positive intelligence as a coach, Bill Carmody, who's the head of coaching for Positive Intelligence. Welcome, Bill. Hey,
thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate you having me on.
Bill is just a great guy. He's got really a lot of experience, both building businesses, but also as a coach, and is really, once we start talking about the 3 rules of marriage, his new book, is passionate about both fatherhood, but also relationships. And in his book, he ties in a lot of what he's learned from his in-laws and their marriage and his life experience. So let's get into it. First of all, I guess the main question for you, and I hope I don't put you on the spot here, is why a marriage book? I mean, there are millions of marriage books, and why is this one different than other marriage books?
Great. In fact, that's actually one of the very first topics I hit in the book itself. Why me? Why now? Why this book? And I think one of the things that is really important to understand is that I've actually read through countless, probably 57 or more of these relationship books myself. And so, the idea of creating my own relationship book kind of seemed like a silly thing. But the thing that I was realizing was my focus was, as an executive coach, I kept working with some really powerful, both men and women, CEOs, C-suite executives. And even though the focus was always on the business, the leadership team, all of the dynamics you'd expect in an executive coaching relationship, relationships at home kept coming into work. And so I kept seeing this pattern. And I felt like I had an unfair advantage because I both came from, my parents were divorced when I was 12. So I saw what that model looked like. My mother's parents were in a marriage which I would not term as very loving. They were sort of going to their own corners. My perception, obviously, as a kid, they may have had a great relationship, but from my perspective, they kind of just did their own thing, and they didn't really didn't see that loving relationship I was hoping to see. And then I come across and I see my wife's parents before we even started dating. They're 45 years into their marriage, and they're still patting each other on the butts like newlyweds. So that for me was the impetus of this, is like, listen, there's a very simple formula here that they use to create blissful marriage. And for me, I was really looking for what is that, so that anybody can take this on and be able to apply it to their primary relationships.
Yeah, I love that part about the role models, because my parents sadly were separated and divorced when I was about 2. So I never really had a model of what a quote unquote regular marriage or regular parents were. But I did use close friends of my parents who were really good models of parenting, and that's kind of became my paradigm of what parenting should be. So that's great that you were able to find other sources of inspiration. So you say also at the beginning of the book that the book doesn't offer any advice, but it does kind of offer advice, right?
Yeah, I was sort of pulling in the coaching paradigm. And so the intent of the book was to share what I've learned without saying it's right for you. Right. And that was really the intent of the, when I experience heavy advicey books, it's like, this is the only way and there is no alternative. And if you don't follow my thing, right. And that's like nonsense. So from my perspective, this is one view of what I've seen to work really well for my in-laws. I mean, they're now 65 years marriage, still unbelievably blissfully happy, and 65 years into their marriage. So the formula works. My wife and I celebrated our 21st wedding anniversary back in September. And same thing, like blissful marriage. I don't throw that word around. I mean, really happier today than we were when we first started dating, happier than when we were engaged, happier than we were the first year of marriage, which you don't often see. So from that perspective, it's a very distinct model that allowed me to really step into this in a really powerful way that I just wanted to share. And that's it. It's like, hey, if this works for you, try it on. A worst case scenario, you got a really great format that you can play with. And if it doesn't work, let it go. But if it does, it can actually lead you to a really blissful space in your relationship.
Yeah, well, I think all the 3 things it reminds me a little bit of a positive intelligence. A lot of it is is kind of common sense, but it's the way that you present it and the way there's really a coaching aspect of it. Unfortunately, it's not a one-on-one with you, but there is that aspect of you've got to do a little bit of that introspection. You've got to ask yourself some hard questions. Journaling is a big thing within positive intelligence, like a lot of programs, but it's also in the bringing together of all that advice in a way that that people can understand. So let's just go through the 3 rules, one of which I think is going to be maybe more complicated than the other. But do you want to just let's start with the first one.
Let's do it.
The one thing that you should not keep.
Right. Score. Don't keep score. I mean, this is the thing. This one I immediately gravitated to. So just as a quick setup, I was very interested in how my father-in-law and his relationship was working. And so the way this all came to pass is that I asked him, I said, look, you guys are 45 years into your marriage. What's your secret? And he goes, I've got 3 rules. And I'm like, stop, wait, let me get a pen.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So these are not my rules. These are his rules for how to create a blissful marriage. And so the first one is don't keep score. And the thing that was really interesting about that one is that I loved this immediately. Like that was the easiest one for me to adopt because number one, my experience was whenever I was in a fight with, especially with a woman in any capacity, but specifically in a dating relationship, it was an unfair fight. Like she always had a better memory than me, could always bring up all the facts and the details. That's just not the way my brain works. It's like I'm much more by default interested in what's going on right now in this moment. And I found that it was really difficult to be in this quote unquote fight when I just it wasn't an equal fight, right? It was, and so immediately that was my initial feeling was, okay, great. It sort of levels the playing field, but that's not really why it was in place. Why it's in place is that when we go back to the past, even if you both could remember facts and figures extremely well, you're anchoring the relationship into a historical context. And when that happens, you really miss out on being fully present. So it's one thing for us to talk about what's happening right in the here and now. Like, the way you just said that to me made me feel, shame, or I experienced something negative, and that's fine. We can have a conversation about that because we want to improve our work together. But if I say, you always do that every time, every single time,
oh,
right?
That's the worst. Yeah.
And in the positive intelligence language, that gets me into my saboteurs. I experience judgment. I experience judgment from my partner. I experience shame and judgment in myself. I experience judgment in the situation. It's a triple whammy. And then, of course, that brings in whatever flavor control, mine is controller and hyperachiever, but whatever flavor saboteur, accomplished saboteur that someone has is immediately going to show up. So for me, I immediately become controller. It's like, I'm going to take control of this relationship and that's not healthy. That doesn't help. For a pleaser, they're just like, oh, yes, dear, but they really are feeling really frustrated. And so they're not talking about the thing. And so it just gets worse. Victim, oh my God, why? I can't believe she's saying this to me. So regardless of what your saboteurs are, they will always come out if your partner is keeping score and telling you that you're no good.
Right.
And that's not what the kind of relationship you want to have.
Right. So the other side of that, of course, is that feeling in a lot of people experiences in their marriages. They think they're always the one giving in, and this goes back to keeping score. Because if you're always keeping score, you're very conscious of the fact that you're always giving in.
Right.
But there's a couple on TikTok that I see every once in a while that where they play on kind of how they each manage their marriage so successfully. It's usually a joke. But one time they just said, the secret to it is always being at service to your spouse. Yes. Always being generous to your partner and giving in and trying to be as positive as you can. What do you think about that whole idea of? So
I refer to it
that can come in.
Yeah, I refer to it as service leadership, right? So as a servant leader, what it means is that I am here to enhance the life of my partner. And if I sort of can take that perspective, if I feel like, how come I'm the one who always does the dishes? How come I'm the one who's always doing the laundry? How come that's me? What's happening is that I'm feeling victimized by the experience that I'm having with my relationship with my partner. The flip side of that is I love doing dishes because it creates a beautiful environment for my wife to thrive. I know that she's her best when she sees a very clean kitchen. And so if I can contribute to that in any way, I'm making our life better, not just hers, ours too, because essentially I know that when she's happier, I'm happier. So it's like, I look at that. To me, this also comes down to the 5 love languages, right? That's really important to understand. Like, how does my wife feel loved? How is it that she feels connection with me? And so is it words of affirmation? Is it acts of service? Is it gifts, right? So like, is it quality time? Is it touch? What is it? The reason why that's so important is if I understand what really makes her happy, then I can really be proactive in doing this. The thing about keeping score is that all that's out the window. The minute I start keeping score, I'm reducing you to, I'm almost like an accountant's tally of all the wrong that you do against me, right? Here's all the things I don't like about you. Well, if that's what I'm reinforcing every time we have an argument, then what do you like about me, right? Like there's no gratitude in that. There's no, ability to move on into the relationship I want to see. I'm now obsessed with the past, and essentially they can't do anything about the past. So you can't win. Yeah. So instead we go round and round and round and do the same thing over again.
Yeah. Well, that's a thing. I think a lot of men get caught up in this idea that if they, it's either the yes, dear with the resentment, yes, dear, which is not a good sign. I'm guilty of that periodically. It's just sometimes it's just a reflex. Or it's this angle of like, you're the one who's whipped, yes. Your wife is totally under control. And one of the things that we get into in positive intelligence that I think is so strong is the fact that if you look at it from a selfish point of view, if you allow your saboteurs to be triggered because of what's happening, and now you're upping the ante and increasing all that anxiety and stress in the household, guess what? Nobody is the winner. So if you can be as generous as you possibly can, at the very least, you've tamped down all of your partner's saboteurs and all the voices going on in her head if she is not aware of the positive intelligence language or is conscious of, all the things that, we try to get into in coaching or therapy for that matter. Yeah.
Well, and to your point, so like if keeping score is essentially judgment, right? So it's essentially calling in your master saboteur. When I judge you and you experience judgment, you are going to react with your saboteurs, with your judge, with your accomplished saboteurs. And so for me, what's really interesting about the don't keep score is what happens when you're not allowed to keep score. So what's the flip side of that? It's like, well, then really what I'm looking for is gratitude for what is working in the relationship. And if there really is something that's not working in the relationship, it is a sage discernment of, hey, for us to have the kind of relationship we both want, there's some things here that might need to change. And I'm not coming at you saying it's your fault and you did this wrong against me. I'm saying I'm looking at this and I'm saying for the blissful relationship that we both want, there's some things here that are in the way of that. Can we look at that together? And suddenly that I language softens this whole attack. So the keeping score goes out the window, but it's what's left is a space of possibility where we can create what we want to see together. Very different approach, very sage approach.
Yeah. For people who don't understand, know the sage idea, I mean, obviously that comes from the wisdom. It's more the wisdom angle that we teach in the positive intelligence course on how to shift your reaction to negative situations by going to the sage response, which is finding the more positive response and is so important within relationships. I was going to ask about. I was going to mention a suggestion that I make in my weekly webinars on positive intelligence that I give for prospective clients is the idea of using your spouse's saboteur when you encounter a situation. One of the great things about positive intelligence is you can use the negative things that are coming at you as actually a teaching mechanism. And if you can learn to, when your partner says something potentially negative to you and you realize that it's coming from this saboteur language, not necessarily out of the love relationship that you usually have, instead of using that as a trigger to shout back at her or refute it or whatever, take that example as a way, as your cue to then say something positive to her about how much you appreciate whatever it is about her, your relationship, your family life together, all the things that you share. And that kind of ties into your next rule of marriage. Is more important than saying I love you.
Yeah, exactly. It's more important to say I appreciate you than I love you. Yeah. And so the thing about that is you were saying, gratitude is specific. I appreciate that you took out the trash. I appreciate how you handled our son in that really difficult situation.
Right.
I appreciate how you're showing up right now in this moment. Like, those appreciations land very powerfully.
Yeah.
When I say I love you, I can say it and not even mean it. Right.
Yeah.
And we both know, like, the verbal, right? The verbal is I love you, right? But it's like, sort of, it's there, but it's meaningless. And so part of the challenge and why this rule is so powerful is that when you talk about appreciation, it can't be general. I can't say I appreciate you generally, because what someone's going to follow up with, for what? For what do you appreciate me? And then that specifically lands because now you're really telling your partner, what are all the things that make our relationship great? So every time I tell you I appreciate something, I'm reinforcing the behavior I want to see. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Thank you for cooking for me. Thank you so much. You didn't have to do that. I appreciate it. Oh my gosh, I appreciate how you handled this particular situation. That was brilliant. Yeah. Thank you for calling me out or calling me in and helping me see the places where I wasn't really showing up the way I want to show up. Thank you for holding me high. Yeah. All of those appreciations will build a stronger relationship.
Yeah, well, like the taking out the garbage thing. If they never take out the garbage, and then suddenly one day they do, and then you notice that to them and appreciate them, it's like that's a signal to them, like that was important. So you don't usually get we all know, if you've got two sons, 15 and 17, nagging doesn't seem to work, even though we are all kind of attracted to it as a solution.
Well, and the other thing too is, if you look at don't keep score as a way to activate your judge, it's more important to say I appreciate you is essentially a way to activate your sage discernment, right? Because essentially, when that place of appreciation, you are coming from a heart space, from a gratitude space, from a loving space. And so on the one hand, you're not activating their own saboteurs. On the other hand, you are inviting in their sage. And that combined piece is a beautiful space for you to play in your best self with your partner's best self. So the two of you together are really showing up powerfully. That's how you create a blissful marriage, right? If you're both giving your full self into the marriage, then you're going to basically be able to create the kind of life you both want.
Yep. Okay, so then the third rule is don't go to bed fighting. I think I heard this first one, the first time on the Bob Newhart show.
Exactly. No, it really did. And my father-in-law did in fact credit this. This was basically one, I think it was Carol Burnett, who basically said, don't go to bed angry, right? Stay up and fight. And so that was the joke. But the thing about that was there's a truth in it, because the idea is that if you're not allowed to keep score, rule number one, then you need to work with whatever's happening in the present. So if you are allowing something to go all the way to the end of the evening, you have a choice. Either to work it out before your head hits the pillow, or to let it go. Those are your choices, because you're not able to drag up the past. Then you have to say to yourself, how important is this to me? Can I truly let it go? Can I let this go and be present for what really I love in the relationship? Or is this really something that's going to irk me? And if so, I really want to use that as an opportunity to have a conversation about it. So it's not so much stay up and fight as much it is like create that importance. If it's really that important, then share it, but don't pull it into the next morning, because essentially, how do you want to wake up? Do you want to wake up angry and bitter and upset about what happened the day before? Or do you want to start clean, have a new day? It's like, hey, you know what? Yesterday was yesterday. It's in the past. Yeah. Here's what we're focusing on today. How do I keep building the kind of relationship I want to have?
Yeah, resentment never does any good, and that's the way to build it. But so, what do you do in circumstances like when there has been something more traumatic, like a huge decision about the family that was made without the other partner, or adultery, or things like that are totally throw all this kind of.
That's beautiful. I love that question. And so essentially, there are things when you think about sort of what are your values as a human being. If your partner has violated one of your core tenets of values, for me, that's integrity. If that's it, then you really have to be first self-reflecting. Can this marriage continue? And that's not a question that your partner can answer for you. You need to answer it for yourself, because for infidelity, you really have to decide, okay, you know what? They cheated on me. Is this the end? And for many people, it is, and I think from that perspective, you would have to make that hard choice of, okay, what led up to this moment? And is it even possible to repair the experience that I just had? Yeah. So if a top rule that drives you in your life is violated, it's going to come first to you to decide if you're willing to forgive and let it go. If you're not, then again, it's inevitable. Like, this becomes one of those things where you need to be honest with yourself and say, this is a deal breaker for me. I can't move on. I can't move past this. And so for some people, that is the right decision. So I want to be clear that these rules of marriage are how to create a blissful relationship and a blissful marriage. And there are things outside of this that is beyond the context of, creating that safe space and creating that growth. Infidelity is one. Another one is abuse. If you have an abusive partner, it's time to leave. You know what I mean? The best sermon you can have is get the hell out. Yeah. So there are things like this that don't make sense. And I think that, one of the greatest gifts my father ever gave me was divorcing my mom. And I think I say that now as an adult. As a 12-year-old, it was terrifying. It was a whole shift. But when I was able to really see it from his perspective, that the marriage wasn't working, that this was definitely not what he wanted, and it was in the space where staying together would do more harm than good. That took a lot of courage to really stand up for what he needed in his life and also in that relationship, and to walk away.
Yeah, I guess I'm of two minds of that. I agree with you wholeheartedly on abuse. The minute the first blow falls, I mean, that's it. But on the staying together, I mean, most marriages who haven't benefited from either reading your book or going through positive intelligence or therapy, proactive therapy or whatever, stay together quite often because of the history and keeping going. And I don't know where that line is, where it's like, it's not good, it's not comfortable, but still it's better than being apart, or better than not having parents at home.
You just hit it. You just hit the nail on the head. When you are asking yourself, should I stay or should I go? The question is, am I being driven by fear, or am I being driven by love? And that's the distinction, because if it's coming from a fear response or scarcity, like, will I ever find someone else? Can I survive financially? Does this, all those things are fear, scarcity thoughts. And if you're being driven by that, then I'm sorry, those are your saboteurs trying to tell you that, you need to stay in this relationship for all the wrong reasons. Mm-hmm. Now, sage discernment's on the other side. From a place of love, maybe there is an extenuating circumstance. Maybe you really can truly forgive the partner for the mistake they made and get past it. If that's a place of love and connection and discernment, and you really can have empathy for yourself, empathy for your partner, empathy for the situation just occurred, go into the rest of it and really do the work, it can be saved. So I want to be clear, like, this is not a black and white, this is always the way it is answer. This is more of a function of the framework. Like, be aware what's driving your thought process. Is it coming from fear and anxiety, pain and suffering? Or is it coming from that place of love and connection, and you're really in the space where it's possible to overcome this particular issue, and that your marriage can be stronger because of it? Mm-hmm. If that's the case, you absolutely can recover from it. But if you're not, right, that's where you really takes doing the important work to make sure that you are doing what's best for you, and doing what's best for your spouse and your family and the rest of your children, if you have children.
Yeah. It does get more complicated if there are kids involved, because Absolutely. You and I both suffered immensely through losing that stable family structure. And I having not grown up with inside of an unhappy household, I don't know. It's impossible for me to evaluate whether I would have taken that or not having my father present. But my general gut is I'd like to see marriages all stay together if they possibly can, because that's
why I wrote the book, right? Yeah. I'm with you. You and I are aligned. So the idea there for me is having this book as a framework can be very supportive in that outcome, to really be able to stay together. And that really was the intention of the book itself. But I also understand, like, everybody's situation is unique. I mean, we're all imperfect human beings, right? So from that perspective, I really want to encourage anyone to do what's really truly best for them. And if that means going to a therapist, couples counseling, getting the support structure and help that they need, that's the place to start.
Yeah, and if anybody's listening to this who is early on in their marriage, the time to do that is not when you are struggling. It is now. Get Bill's books, take Positive Intelligence, talk to a therapist, get in front of any kind of things. In fact, the best time to go is probably when you're the happiest with your spouse, because then you can set up some of those rules. You can talk about aligning your values, identifying your values together, or saboteurs, because they're not at that point, they're not threats. They're like, oh, we're totally in love. We just want to make this the best thing possible. Later on, those conversations get a little bit more, get harder to hear, because they're rooted in stressors that you've already had. So Bill, you're on your site, 3 Rules of Marriage. That's 3 spelled out, 3rulesofmarriage.com. You're offering two free chapters of the book.
That's right.
So people can take a look at that, 3rulesofmarriage.com. And then coming up on February 9th, you're doing a free webinar for applying mental fitness, or applying the positive intelligence tenets to relationship mastery. Can you tell a little bit about that?
Yeah. So what's really fascinating for me was when I wrote the 3 Rules of Marriage, I had not yet joined Shirzad and Positive Intelligence. So I had not launched the coaching school or done any of the work that I've been doing. And so what was requested of me was one of our coaches who was helping to support relationships, parenting, youth, all of that in our communities of practice. She had asked me, would I be willing to sort of now deconstruct the book, the 3 Rules of Marriage, with the actual mental fitness framework. And that's really where the impetus of this particular free session came from, was like, hey, you know what? Knowing what I know now, the ability to sort of go back and look at the principles in the 3 Rules of Marriage and apply them to mental fitness training, understanding the foundations of saboteurs and sage powers connected to your marriage through the lens and understanding of these basic rules and tenets, and where do they come from. So that really is the intent of that session. And it's open to anyone. They don't have to have already gone through Positive Intelligence or done any of the training. It's really an opportunity for them to get a connection to understand how to use the foundations of mental fitness to really enhance the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that'll be up on positiveintelligence.com, or where will that be located then?
So I'm going to give in the show notes, we'll have the link to the Zoom link, and we will post that out there. It will be shared around in Positive Intelligence. We will be sharing it within the coaching community. We'll be sharing out with their individual networks. So essentially what I'll do is you'll have the Zoom link and you can share it with your audience, and then they can join us if they would like to join us.
And will it be recorded for later? Yeah. Right.
That's right. Yeah.
So I'd just like to finish up with a little bit of conversation about positive intelligence for those who don't know about it, who haven't attended my weekly webinar on Wednesdays at 11 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Because I'm now doing this for about a year. I've run 3 pods, run 15 people through it, and the reactions I've got are far beyond what I would have even expected. I mean, I guess I consider myself a fairly evolved guy, so I guess I was sort of in touch with my feelings, if you can say that. But for a lot of people, it is just such an eye opener. And I'm very frank, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this. But I'm very frank with people both in the webinar and with prospective clients about the fact that none of this is really. It relies on brain science, but it isn't brain surgery. It's not something new. It wasn't invented out of whole cloth. It's taking a lot of wisdom all the way back to the Stoics, really, in ancient Greek philosophy, and in the fact that you can make your own choices in life. That's one of the few things that we really are able to do ourselves, that we really have control over. But then marries it with neuroscience, positive psychology, the cognitive behavior therapy, and even performance science, and packages it all together in a 6-week program that you go through with other people in a small pod, a cohort of people. So it's a combination of group coaching and then an app on your phone that leads you through exercises to help develop these skills. I'd love to hear what you are so much more into this and speak brilliantly about all the aspects on our weekly calls. What am I missing in terms of the secret sauce to it that maybe I should be telling people about?
So the interesting thing about the secret sauce is that there is a huge distinction between knowing something and living something.
Yes.
And so the Greek philosophers you reference, I mean, all of that is timeless. The idea that, I think it was Aristotle that said, it is our daily habits that create our destiny. So this is going way back, right? But here's the thing, what are our daily habits? And so, there was this whole movement around emotional intelligence, and the book Emotional Intelligence is great. There's lots of great thought behind it, but it's like, okay, great. So I know intellectually that having emotional intelligence is important. How do I do it?
Yeah.
And that's when things break down.
How do I keep at it? How do I keep it in mind? Yeah.
That's right. So I think the brilliance of positive intelligence and Shirzad's work specifically has been breaking it down into a 2-minute PQ rep, a very simple way to connect and drop back in your body. So whether that's a tactile, whether that's breathing, whether that's visual, auditory, kinesthetic, all of these things that are done can be done in literally 2 minutes or less. And suddenly I can see how going into a place where I'm experiencing my saboteurs, I'm feeling hijacked, my amygdala is all acting up, to going back to a space where I'm the best version of myself in a heartbeat, right? Now, the thing is that when I first joined Positive Intelligence, I was curious as to, did Shirzad live this work, or was he just espousing, the principles of it? Because that's always interesting, right? I've worked with a lot of different companies, and oftentimes the CEO is one way outside, external facing, and a totally different way internal. And I can tell you from my own experience, within the first week of our work together, Shirzad was in the middle of a meeting and got hijacked, and he said, wait, time out. I'm experiencing my saboteurs right now in this moment. I need a moment. And he did his PQ reps, and he instantly switched spaces right back and was the best version of himself. That was when I was hooked, because here's the thing. Imagine if you're in the middle of a heated argument with your spouse and you said, hang on, honey, I'm experiencing my judge. I'm experiencing my saboteurs. I am not the best version of myself right now. Can you give me a moment? And then with 2 minutes, come right back to the best version of yourself and say, let's start over. Let's try this again. Let's approach this the way we both want to see, and then come from a very discerning place as opposed to a judgmental space. That's it. That's like, if you ask for the secret sauce, that's it, is the ability to do something in such a short period of time that you can live into this possibility. If there's nothing else, when people understand the simplicity of an operating system like that, they can change and take on any aspect of their life they so choose, including what we're talking about, their primary relationship.
Yeah. Well, anytime you're hearing those voices, whether it's you're lying in bed at 3 a.m. and they're chattering at you, or you're in the middle of a challenge, that emotion that you later regret, that all that passion, all that worrying in your brain is not the way to find what we call the sage, but which is really the more creative, insightful, positive reaction to that solution. And that is for me is just the magic, because for anybody who's lived through stressful situations and know how out of control your brain can get, you don't want that. Or people experience mind chatter. Some people experience mind chatter all day long, just a cacophony. Ending that is just great. So, and Shirzad Charmaine is the CEO. He's the founder of Positive Intelligence. It is interesting to watch him, because you can. What was very real about him is that you can see his saboteurs periodically on display. Sure. You can see it in the group meetings we have. He's running a meeting with maybe 200, 300 people who are interacting with him. And like all of us, he falls into the same kind of traps. But he is, like, as you say, he's a very charismatic guy. And I guess I would trust him less if he wasn't. He didn't own up to his own saboteurs and his own problems and say, I'm not God. I'm not the paradigm. I'm not reached the top of the mountain. I'm still working on this. Might be a few years ahead of you guys, but it's nothing different than that.
Yeah. You've nailed it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it's been really fun talking to you one-on-one. Usually I'm one in a sea of, 50 or 100, and interacting with you that way. So Bill, pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah. And Paul, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate you.
So if anybody wants to learn more about positive intelligence, you can go to GreatDad.com/PQ. PQ is the short form for positive intelligence. And you'll see the schedule of my upcoming webinars, as well as an explanation of what positive intelligence is all about, and also a little video of Shirzad giving a summary. So thanks again, Bill.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate you.